Hey there, and welcome to the Sun's Solar Panel Podcast. Welcome back. I'm your host, Dave King, and today on the show, I'm joined by Zach Harper. Welcome to the show, Zach.
Thanks for having me, dude.
Sure. Zach, just so in case you guys don't recognize his name, he's pretty famous, but in case you don't recognize his name, he's a writer for The Athletic these days, radio host on Sirius XM, and podcast host. Do you still do Count the Dings these days?
Yep, Count the Dings. So we've got Cinephobe, which is a podcast I do with Amin Al-Hassan, where we watch
one of
poorly rated. Yeah, he used to be. Then I talk to him almost every day, and now he's no longer one of my favorites. So he's a monster that needs to be stopped. But yeah, Amin and I watch bad movies, and then we try to figure out if they're actually good or not on this podcast Cinephobe. And then we've got podcasts for The Athletic and radio and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that is awesome. I've met him at Suns games for years, and he's a great guy. He pisses off Suns fans though, so we're okay if you're mad at him.
Yeah, he really does.
All right, I've been a long time follower of your work, and everything I read from you, I love it. Even though you are traditionally a very big skeptic of the Suns organization and specifically Devin Booker. Did you get that straight from Amin, or did you develop that yourself?
Yep. Am I a skeptic of Devin Booker?
Everyone who doesn't absolutely think Devin Booker is all NBA superstar, future Hall of Fame is a skeptic, I think.
I've voted him all NBA, like for the official awards. I don't know what more I can do.
You did?
Yeah.
Nice. Maybe I'm just it's like old impressions never change. So thank you for letting me know on that.
Yeah. No, I think there's this weird thing with Suns fans where I was asked years ago. Why isn't Devin Booker universally accepted? And I said, well, with a lot of guys who are in his position, good stats on a bad team, people start wondering, is he a looter and a riot? And for some reason, Suns fans on Twitter, I guess, don't know how to read or don't like to read. And so they started saying, oh, you think he's that? I'm saying, no, you're asking me why he's not universally accepted. I'm not universal acceptance. I'm answering the question. We went through it with Kevin Love. We went through it with Andre Drummond. We went through it with pretty much any good player on a horrible team for a bad franchise, which the Suns were for about a decade. And that's the question.
We don't even contest the bad franchise part.
Right.
But you heard it here first, or not first, but most recently, folks, Zach Harper is the originator of Looter and a Riot.
I'm not even the originator of it. I'm just saying, like, I find it interesting that I was asked a question of why isn't he universally accepted? And I said, oh, this is probably why, because that's what people wonder with guys like this. And that became me thinking he's a looter and a riot, which I actually said when asked, do you think he is? I said, no, I don't. But that's why, like, you put
those words were in a sentence. You know how fake news is these days.
Well, for sure. Yeah, I know.
Hey, man, I'm just having fun with you. You're like I said, I have a high level of respect for you. I love Amin too, even if the Suns fans, are a little skeptical. Right now, you are working on season previews with The Athletic.
I am.
And I love your work. The depth you go into on The Athletic is really, really great. You break down each of the teams, you break down each of the positional areas on whether they improved or not, and whether you think they're getting better this year. You're about halfway through the league, I'd say, probably around.
Yeah, I think we just crossed the halfway point. I think either Memphis or Boston was the halfway point of this preview, and so Memphis just came out yesterday. Boston comes out today, so I think we're about halfway. Yeah,
and so obviously, and you're working backwards from how they did last year. So the Suns are coming up later. You're expecting that'll probably publish next week or the week after?
I believe the end of next week or the beginning of the week after. I can't remember how it's ordered, but yeah, I think it's either late next week or right after that.
Okay, that puts it right close to training camp time.
Yes.
So, well, good. You know what? For the first time in 10 years, the Suns would not have already been covered in your season.
Yeah. This years ago, last few years, this would have been old news already. We would have been weeks late on this. Now the luxury of being a good team, being a great team, really.
That's awesome. Okay, so For the listeners here who don't subscribe to The Athletic, by the way, you really should. Even though Phoenix area lost The Athletic regional coverage this past year, on the national level, these guys are unparalleled. It's really worth your investment. I'm still subscribed myself. You list out what you do is you list out several team status options that you're using. Which do you know yet? Because you are working on all of them at varying stages. Do you know yet how you're going to categorize the Suns this coming year?
Yeah, so I've got them as brink of contention, with the goal being contender, right? And I know that may sound kind of disrespectful because they just came out of the NBA Finals, but I think for a lot of these teams, unless I think I have very few contenders in this moving forward, just because there is a hierarchy of like, if everyone's healthy, this is how it looks. I think Suns fans probably won't be happy about that, but there is just a question of like, all right, they've had this success in the first year. Chris Paul always has like this big boost in the first year. After that, there is a little bit of a waning with his personality, kind of
grinding,
grinding guys down. And so I am curious how that's going to work with the Suns team. They seem to be such a good place as a unit in terms of liking each other that I don't anticipate that being a long-term issue, at least with the next couple of years being long-term for Chris Paul. But I do think like there's just a little bit about that where I'm like, okay, I'd like to just pull back a tiny bit and see. But yeah, they're basically brink of contention / contender.
Let me letting you in on it in our earlier conversation about Suns fans. This is also along the same lines right here. We are our own worst critics.
Yeah.
But we can't stand it with somebody else as a critic outside the regional
It's the
area.
whole like, you can't say that about my brother, I can kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
So none of us think they're absolute contenders, except for the most optimistic, and the ones who are listening to this right now are probably going, "That's me." But most Suns fans would put them on the brink of contention as well, and it's just in a prove it mode. We were all skeptical of Chris Paul's impact on the team in year one because the team was so young and so undisciplined on winning, we'll say. Right. And Chris Paul holds you to that standard every single second of every day. So my question on Chris Paul coming into season 2 now with his basically his retirement contract on the books is A, will he be as focused this year going forward? And B, will the team be as responsive? I feel like the answers to both of those are yes, but we have to wait and see.
Yeah, and I think like the tricky part of that is we didn't get the honeymoon or what happens after the honeymoon phase with OKC, right? And we've gotten that every step of the way with him, but we didn't get that because they just shipped him out because they wanted to, go all tank all the time. And so with that, like now we will see that with the Suns. And maybe the honeymoon phase lasts 2 years, 3 years, who knows? Like it's typically about a year, and then guys are just like, oh my God, this dude is on me all the time. We're good. I'm good. We're winning. Like, what's the big deal? But he's someone I would say is psychotically competitive. And I mean that as a compliment,
Here's where I'm hoping. Absolutely. And we saw it. He was arguing, in a productive way. He was arguing with just about everybody from day one. Here's where I am hoping and putting my faith on the fact that he's not going to wear everybody out. With one possible exception, but I was a skeptic a year ago, and he proved me completely wrong. But Chris Paul, here's the thing: they won every time, in the way he said they would win, and they got all the way to the finals, regardless of what you think about other teams facing injury issues and things like that. They succeeded with him, so it's not like you come in year 2 going, "Man, that didn't get us as far as I wanted to go, so maybe I've got a better way." Nobody still has a better way of getting to the finals than the Chris Paul way. Monty Williams is a huge believer in Chris Paul. Devin Booker, and here's the other part, Devin Booker is a disciple of Chris Paul. There's no one's going to let as soon as Chris Paul gets out of your face, Devin Booker gets into your face. Yeah. He is learning how to be a leader from Chris Paul, and he is just soaking it all up. He said several times last year, I just watch Chris Paul walk around and how he carries himself and what he does when he's not even speaking, which is rare. But that's what guys are learning from. The one I'm always skeptical of is because he gets so much flack is DeAndre Ayton. Mm-hmm. He's got to chill I'd be on a beach if I wasn't playing basketball attitude. And yet he's so talented that Chris Paul's on his butt all the time. And Ayton responded so beautifully last year, even when he was playing terribly. Like Ayton went through a bad stretch last year where he didn't know right from left. He didn't know, any angles properly on the pick and roll. Anyway, you're the guest. I'm going to stop rambling. So let's go through and what we're going to do here today is we're going to go through some of the teams that you've done already previews for and talk about your feelings about them coming up and some of the other teams that are coming that are not the Suns. And then when we get to the Suns, we're going to go through kind of a mini version of your season preview and talk about each of the positional areas and whether they've improved or not. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, for sure. Let's do it.
All right, man. Okay, so in the Pacific Division so far, just the Suns' own division, which divisions don't really matter anymore, but still, I'm old, so I still cling to who's in my division, whether it matters or not. You've done so far just the Warriors and the Kings.
Right.
The Warriors, you've got a B+ offseason playoff hopeful, and the Kings, a B offseason, and in the category you're calling tired of rebuilding, which is less than the category of playoff hopeful. So has basically, since both of these teams were that this past year, do you see their seasons going dramatically different than last year?
I mean, I think the Warriors will be really good. I don't know about like contention, but I just look at the Warriors, and Steph was magical last year. Draymond Green was someone who I kind of regret not voting him Defensive Player of the Year. I really struggled with that vote between the three of Rudy Gobert, Ben Simmons, and Draymond Green. And when it was all said and done, like kind of a month away from the season, I thought to myself, I should have voted Draymond Green. Like he would, like you look at what he did and what that team was. That's a top 5 defense. They have no business being a top 5 defense last year. And that's all him. And so those two are a special level within their respective roles that you just can't account for anywhere else. They'll get Klay back, I don't know, late December, early January. Hopefully he's back to himself offensively by February. And then from there, that second half of the season, it'll be really interesting to see how they go. Wiggins played the best ball of his career last year on both ends of the floor. I thought he was spectacular for him. And they've brought in a bunch of like good veterans to kind of increase the basketball IQ of this team. They still are going to have James Wiseman, Jonathan Kuminga, and Moses Moody trying to figure things out on the fly. And so that will be interesting because I do think at least Kuminga and Wiseman will get regular minutes. But everywhere else, like I just think that as long as they're healthy, they've increased the basketball IQ. And that's the key with playing with Steph is you have to know how to play with Steph. And for young guys, that took a while for them to figure out. For the veterans that they brought in, I think that'll be a lot easier. And then the Kings side of it, I mean, it's the Kings. Like we can try to like, oh, De'Aaron Fox is really good and Buddy Hield can shoot. And like, sure, like individually, there's some nice parts. I think Davion Mitchell is going to be a really good player for them. Tyrese Halliburton's obviously very good. It would be great if Marvin Bagley III was able to stay healthy so we could figure out if he's good. And then, I was shocked that they re-signed Rashawn Holmes, but because I thought he would go somewhere else. But they were the second worst defense in NBA history last year. Like, I mean, if you want to talk yourselves into them, go ahead. They're one of those teams like the Suns of a few years, or a lot of these teams. Timberwolves are hoping to have high hopes, and I'm just like, okay, show me. Until you can like consistently show us, like there's literally no reason to believe in the Kings.
Man, ever since that, the Game of Thrones version of the NBA videos came out, the Sun Kings episode, Game of Zones, that was it. Sun Kings episode. It's amazing how the franchises have kind of flipped up and down because they were both at the bottom. Then the Kings went up and the Suns went down, and now they're reversing course. We're just in Phoenix. We're just crossing our fingers and closing our eyes and just wait, hoping that this lasts for years and years and years.
I think like whether they're going to be as good as they were last year, I think so, but I don't know for sure. But you got to feel good about the core of this whole thing, right? Like, I mean,
absolutely.
The fact that Robert Sarver actually pays to keep everyone together. We'll see what happens with Mikal Bridges' extension.
That's my worry.
Yeah, because he's someone where if I'm his agent, I'm like, you can max me out. Like I'll get a huge contract somewhere else. If you max me out, then you don't have to worry about it. And that's a lot of money that they would have committed at that point.
We'll talk about the extensions here a little bit later because I am really curious to pick your brain on that. So that's the Pacific Division. You've yet to get to the Clippers, Lakers, and Suns, which means those guys are all projected for the playoffs. What order would you put the Clippers, Lakers, and the Suns at this point?
I think a healthy Lakers team I'd put at the top, then the Suns, then the Clippers. Even if the Clippers were healthy, I think I'd have the Suns ahead of them at this point. Because at the same time, like I said, the Kings are the Kings, the Clippers are the Clippers. Like they find a way to get in their own way, whether by injury or just by blowing a 3-1 lead to the Denver Nuggets in the bubble. Like it's just the Clippers find a way. I think the Clippers should be at the top with their talent level, but Kawhi's hurt and the rest of that team is fine, but it's not good enough to be in contention with the Suns. So I think there's a pretty definite gap of like Lakers 1A, Suns 1B, clear third for the Clippers, and then the Warriors, because of the Kawhi injury, the Warriors could end up being third at some point this season.
And this is just us talking about the Pacific Division. Obviously, there's other teams like Denver and teams like that. Do you see any other West teams vying for the top spot in the West?
I mean, Utah's a really tough regular season team to deal with. They have their own issues in the playoffs, but in terms of regular season, like that's a team that's very hard to deal with on random nights. Denver will be up there too, although I don't know if they're even going to get the Jamal Murray injury. Like I think it happened on like April 12th. Yeah, like
that's bad. That's bad.
Best case scenario, you get him right before the playoffs, and then even like I would sit him the whole year personally if I'm Denver, unless he's some kind of like modern medical miracle, or I just don't see why you would force that this year. But they'll still be really good. Their offense is going to be incredible, and who knows, Michael Porter Jr. might make a leap.
So who's more likely to sit the whole year, Kawhi or Jamal?
I think Kawhi, just because he's Kawhi, right? With that injury history and the load management history and injury management, however you want to brand it. Like he's just someone where I don't see him taking these chances with his body. He's been very careful about that dating back to San Antonio. And so it's not a full tear. So that's good. I've partially torn my ACL. I never came back to the NBA, but we have a little bit different of medical history and medical teams. Yeah, it was pretty touch and go for a while, but I just expect him to be very careful with it. Whereas Jamal, he's young. I think like I could see him really working hard to try to get back early, and then who knows what happens at that point.
Yeah, and speaking of big time injury comebacks, Klay Thompson, they're talking generally around December, which is a year since his last injury. How do you feel about the percent of Klay we're going to see this next year?
Yeah, I mean, I think offensively he'll be fine. That shot doesn't take a whole lot to get space and get off and be as one of the most pure jump shots we've ever seen. And so I think offensively he'll be great, that's a huge boost for them because this was a really bad offense last year, even with Steph being as great as he was. But defensively, like that's the thing about Klay, right? Is he does it at an elite level on both ends of the floor. He can go out and drop 40 on you, and he can go do a good job defensively on Devin Booker. Like that's what he can do, but I don't know how you expect that defense. I mean, even like look, KD, it's a little bit different, but KD this last year, he was great offensively. Defensively, it took him until about the playoffs to really be good on that end of the floor. And so I don't like offense. I expect him to be at 90%. Defense, like if he's at 50, that's probably a win for the Warriors. I just don't know how you project that.
And on defense, at 50%, Klay is basically he's an average guy.
Yeah. You're looking at like probably like another Wiggins out there, like it with of Klay at 50%, which is still fine. It's better than like trying to throw, whatever random wing player they had out there last year, but that's not what you need out of Klay.
Right. For the rest of the Western Conference, looks like you've got the Grizzlies as your most playoff hopeful of the other teams you've previewed so far. Grizzlies, Pelicans, Kings, Wolves, Thunder, and Rockets. How good do you think the Grizzlies will be this year?
I mean, I think they're going to be good. Like they've been ahead of schedule and they've been above expectations the last 2 years. I don't expect that to change. Like I think we got a taste of what they're like last year when when there is a little bit of a target on their back, right? Like people weren't like, oh no, it's the Grizzlies, but they weren't surprised by the Grizzlies anymore. They had seen it the previous year. The key for them is just going to be, can Jaren Jackson Jr. be healthy? Because we really don't like
and stay out of foul trouble.
Right, stay out of foul trouble. But like he was like, even if he was in foul trouble every game, like as long as he's in every game, you're getting 20 to 25 minutes of elite defense and a guy who can stretch the floor. And this is already a really good defensive team. If they're healthy, they could be the best defense in the league. I think they're that good. Taylor Jenkins does a phenomenal job. Everyone buys in, despite it being such a young team, which is so rare. And I'm interested to see, like, where does Ja Morant go in his third season? Like, what does that look like? Because teams are now going to give him the Rondo treatment of just like, we're playing way off you. We don't respect your jumper. Like, you have to do something. And how does he adjust that? He doesn't necessarily have to hit threes. He doesn't even have to take them, but giving him full vision of the court and seeing how he reacts to that will probably tell the tale of just how good they are offensively. But yeah, I think this Grizzlies team, they might end up in the play-in tournament again just because of the numbers game in the West, but I would be shocked if they don't make it through the play-in tournament and end up at least with the 7 or 8 seed.
All right. Okay. I have a curveball for you, because this isn't exactly what your previews covered, but for, I don't know, is it 20 years now? The West has been, hey, whoever comes out of the West is almost certainly going to win the championship unless it's a surprise.
Right.
And the East was always, oh man, the bottom half of the East playoff picture is just a mess. And maybe half of them will be losing records and all that. Has that switched a little bit to where now the presumptive favorites for the championship, barring the Lakers having the most perfect possible season, the presumptive championship would go to either the Nets or the Bucks this year, and several of the other East teams are considered really, really good.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I feel like, at least on Twitter the last 3 or 4 years, it's been like, hey, the East is good again, and then they're not, right? Like, you have some good teams, but it's not. This is the first year where I think you'll actually look at that and be like, oh, this is truthful. Like, you have 8 to 10 good teams in the Eastern Conference finally, and you're not just pulling guys and trying to get an 18 playoff out there. But it's weird to me that the Bucks are so undervalued right now, and that they're almost overlooked because of the Lakers and because of the Nets in their own conference, obviously. But I don't feel like anyone's really even put pressure or raised questions like, can they repeat? Are they going to be good enough? Like I think they won the championship, and then people are just like, all right, whatever. Like, let's go look for the stars again and look at, the Suns are going through that a little bit with the Lakers, right? Suns win the West, and now Lakers go out and get Westbrook, and they go get Melo and Malik and all that, and now people are like, oh yeah, Lakers, like, here we go. And even I'm guilty of that too. But the Suns are very, very good, like one of the elite teams, and so the Bucks are going through that almost a little bit more disrespectfully because they are the defending champs. But yeah, everyone's just looking at Brooklyn saying, if they're healthy, that's the team coming out of the East. And everyone's saying, oh, if the Lakers are healthy, that's the team coming out of the West. And everyone else is just kind of kicked aside.
Like, what the hell? Yeah, exactly.
Right. Which maybe that's a good thing, right? You can play the, like, no one believes in this card. Like, teams love to do that. And so that might be the way to, if you're the Suns or the Bucks, like, that may be the way to kind of avoid the next year hangover of, like, and we were right there. Yeah. If everyone's kind of dismissing it, saying, oh, well, injuries did this and injuries did that, you can use that. And I guarantee Chris Paul and Monty Williams will try to use that, in Devin Booker too, right? He's
every second of every day. Yes. They've got to have something, because there are guys, young guys on the team. That was their first playoff run for the Suns, and they went all the way to the finals almost. And they felt like they went through some adversity too. Now, of course, the teams they played against went through their own adversity.
Yeah, but that's such a tired thing. Like, I get it. Yes, Anthony Davis went down. Yes, this guy got hurt. That guy. There are injuries every single playoffs. Like, we only focus
and the
on
Suns
it now.
faced their own injuries.
Yeah,
Chris Paul literally played with one arm in the first round against. He was not Chris Paul against the Lakers.
He couldn't like Chris Paul. He was. I don't think
he was dribbling like me on a court. Jeez. And so that was the first round. I hate that
dismissal. Yeah, they made it. They made the finals. Like, get over it. They did. They played who was in front of them. Like, that's all you can do, and they did a good job.
So these guys are good. Their first playoff run, They battled through every adversity they faced with Chris Paul being out. Devin Booker breaking his nose. He almost never drove to the rim after his nose was broken in 3 places. I mean, the very next game he said, I had no idea how many times my face gets hit in a game.
Yeah.
until now.
Have you ever tried to play with a broken nose before? It's
awful. No, you don't.
It's terrifying.
You don't.
It is. Yeah, it's terrifying. Like you really don't realize how much you get hit in the face.
You constantly do.
Yeah.
Especially if you're driving into the rim. So Booker turned into just a Landry Shamit kind of. Speaking of that, as far as that, obviously extremely talented offensively, but he did not drive anymore. And so the Suns face those, and I'm worried a little bit about the young guys thinking they've got it easy and Chris Paul having to whip them into shape. But luckily, you've got Chris Paul, and he carries the whip every day.
Right.
So let's talk about the Suns now. Let's move on to that. If you gave the Suns an off-season grade overall, what would you say you'd give it so far?
I would say probably like an A-. Like I think that I would have liked them to address their interior issues a little bit more than just JaVale McGee, although I think he's more of a good role player now than the punchline we're used to him being. Like he's good. He's like for 15 minutes a game off the bench, like he's a really good option. I guess I don't think you can expect Dario to be back next season. Like I think that's unreasonable. Like so
there was some post on a European site that Reddit found from Dario's father, who says something like Dario's going to be ready by Christmas, but everyone's optimistic in the offseason.
Right. Yeah. That seems extreme to me based on what I know about ACL injuries, but I love the optimism, right? If it keeps him working hard and rehabbing, that's great. But so I still think there are some holes. I mean, maybe like, they can play big or they can play small with Jay Crowder playing big, and there's some ways to get around that. But and maybe Jalen Smith, right? Maybe Jalen Smith comes through and has a role in the next year. But I do think like there's still some issues interior wise, especially if Deandre Ayton gets into foul trouble in any given game, or God forbid he gets hurt, then I think you've got some issues there. But like the fact that they kept everybody together. The fact that they brought back Campaign, I thought Campaign was going to be a casualty of just like not spending, right? I thought he was going to go out somewhere, make the mid-level exception, and they were going to have to bring someone else in. I'm not a huge Elfrid Payton guy. I don't think he's very good for what he's been asked to do, but as like the third point guard now, maybe that's just good insurance. Landry Shamit is someone that I think people really want to be excited about every time their team acquires him, and there's just always something missing. He's a great shooter who shoots well. He's a guy who can't really handle the ball, but a lot of coaches have asked him to do that. And he's a guy who can defend within the team concept, not a great on-ball defender. But outside of that, I think them just bringing everyone back feels like a huge win and feels like a very positive grade for me.
Okay, so let's go through each of the positional areas because I really like how you've laid out your articles. Lead guards. You touched on Elfrid Payton a little bit.
Yeah.
The Suns are bringing back Chris Paul and Cameron Payne. Cameron Payne, even though he's 27 years old now, I feel like this is like his second chance at life, and he's figured out how to play successfully in the NBA and be and help contribute to a winner. And now Elfrid Payton comes in as the third guard. While none of us love Elfrid Payton, he had 19-game stint with the Suns a few years ago.
That's right.
By game before we were ready to move on from him. So
yeah, that's usually how it goes.
He's not a dude you gotta love. But Monty Williams' third lead guard a year ago was basically Etuan Moore because Javon Carter couldn't run an offense. Langston Galloway is a shooter only. They didn't have really a good third guard. So Payton feels like he's got to be better than Etuan Moore, right?
Yes, I mean he Etuan can shoot and Payton can't.
He just didn't turn the ball over was Etuan's big thing.
Right. Yeah. I mean Elfrid can legitimately like run an offense, so that's a positive. He's not going to give you any kind of like efficient scoring, but he can run an offense. Like defensively, it's not great for a guy who's supposed to be an okay defender, and so you lose something obviously going from, Etuan Moore, Javon Carter to him defensively. But like, again, for as long as Chris Paul's healthy, as long as Cam Payne is healthy, like as a third point guard, like you can do a lot worse than Elfrid Payton.
All right. And then so you'd say they improved then? Or just kind of stayed the same?
I'd say stayed the same, just because I do like the roles that Carter and Moore fill for the most part, and I do have some skepticism with Peyton. So I'd say it's pretty much like no change in terms of the talent.
Okay. Along the wing is where you get into the acquisition that went really under the radar, and I just don't know what to expect. But basically, the acquisition of Landry Shamit to be Devin Booker's primary backup at shooting guard, and then the recent signing of Chandler Hutchison to a two-way contract, and going out are just basically Langston Galloway and Tyshawn Alexander, because I'm going to classify Torrey Craig as a forward, at least for this grouping. What do you think about their what they did at the wing there?
I like it. So that's the thing, like I mentioned earlier with Shamit, is everyone's always excited. Like Philly was super excited to get him when they drafted him. The Clippers were very excited to trade for him. The Nets were excited to trade for him. Like everyone is always very excited about the idea of Landry Shamit. The reality has not been what you hope for. He's a guy who he can't really handle the ball at all, which you can say, well, he's just a 3-and-D guy. Like he doesn't have to. You do have to, though. You have to be able to attack a closeout. You have to be able to push the ball up the floor, in transition. Like there's just certain things you've got to do that he's not good at. And it doesn't really seem to have any kind of progression that you can see there, but he can shoot the ball, and whether he makes it or not, teams are afraid of leaving him open. His reputation as a shooter brings hesitation, and if you bring hesitation against, the weapons that, or defending the weapons that the Suns have, like that's a win, right? You give them an extra half second of time to make a move, then that move is going to be even more lethal. And so the idea of him will work. I'm curious, like what Monty can do with him defensively, because he's been in some situations before where, he like, hey, you expect him to be a better defender than he is, and it just hasn't happened yet. But, he's also bounced around a lot. If he can get his feet wet, I do think Monty is very good at bringing guys along into that system and asking what to do. Having Chris Paul there to be on him, as long as he's receptive to it, will help. Devin Booker being on him will be receptive to help. Him going against Devin in practice, whenever they practice, especially for training camp, like that's going to be a huge benefit to him. It's going to look like, I think I was watching the Rams game on Sunday night, and there was a mention of Matthew Stafford saying, like, I get to go against this defense every day in practice, and it makes it look so much easier for me, right? When we get to the games, and that's because the Rams have or at least last year had the best defense in the NFL with Landry Shamit going against Devin Booker every single day in practice. Like there are going to be a lot of nights where then he has to go defend someone else, and it's going to be like, oh, this is easy. I don't have to go, I'm not going against Book every day. Like this is great. So I do think there's something to that can improve him defensively. But yeah, like I like the idea of the acquisition here in Phoenix with Landry Shamit.
Just like every prior team.
I liked it everywhere else too, though.
Yeah. Rank these players. So to give us context here in Phoenix, what's your impression of ranking these players fit as that role of backing up Devin Booker and potentially playing next to Devin Booker as the lead, with Booker playing the lead guard? Langston Galloway, Etuan Moore, Landry Shamit.
I'd probably say I like Etuan Moore a lot because he feels low risk. So I'd say probably Etuan Moore, Landry Shamit, Langston Galloway. Langston really doesn't do a whole lot outside of shooting, right? Like he just like you'd like him to do a lot more, but you don't just need a shooter to back up Devin Booker. You need someone who can do a little bit more. And so I think I would go more Shamit, Galloway, but that more Shamit thing again. If it's the idea of Shamit, it's higher, but just the application of him has not been there yet. So I'll just put him a little bit lower than Etuan.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you a question, because the only other thing that happened on the wings for the Suns is that they let two-way young 22, 23-year-old Tyshawn Alexander go, and then they signed a mini veteran in Chandler Hutchison. After he'd been released by the Spurs, he still gets his full Spurs contract. after that trade from the Wizards, after that trade from the Bulls. Chandler Hutchison gets a full year contract, and then he signs on with the Suns as a two-way. And with the new two-way rules, you can play in up to 50 games. So you're basically third string, right? I mean, there's a lot of guys who don't get in 50 games, and they have a full NBA contract.
Right.
So
exactly.
for the Suns, that's a good deal. For Chandler Hutchison, what do you think about him? Do you think, A, did the Suns use a two-way contract properly? And B, is Chandler Hutchison the kind of guy they should take a flyer
on? I don't mind taking a flyer on him. There is talent there. He's not much of a playmaker. He's not much of a shooter. And so he's a big guy for a wing, especially by today's standards, with everyone going so much smaller. And so I like the idea of Chandler Hutchison kind of the same way I like the idea of Landry Shamit. But yeah, like I would probably use a two-way on more of a G League prospect than someone who's kind of bounced around a little bit at this point and is, a quote unquote failed first round pick. But I also just think that that's an easier way of going about it. We are seeing more teams kind of go with a Chandler Hutchison type of two-way guy this offseason. I think they're going to try to like exploit that, that cost effectiveness, in terms of just like using it on a high upside guy. Like he's a higher upside guy than I think a lot of those G League guys are, but I also think his floor is a lot lower. So I don't mind the signing. They probably could have used that better though.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I mean, I mean, we're talking in a vacuum here of what's the best you can do with a two-way. Generally, your two-way players aren't going to play for the big club anyway. So that does beg a larger question. Okay, you already touched on JaVale McGee, so I would say, would you just in general, would you say the Suns improved in the bigs area or stayed about the same because they lost Dario? Basically, Dario's out most of the season.
Yeah, I mean, they probably even declined a little bit just because Dario is so much more versatile. But when you get into the playoffs, I would say that just for the regular season, when you get into the playoffs, you're going against the front line of the Lakers, or you're going against Jokic, or whatever that matchup ends up being as you get deeper and deeper in, or you're going against the Jazz with Rudy Gobert. Although you want to go small to play him off the court, as we've learned the last few years, but having that actual big body instead of the versatile big body, that would probably pay off for them better in the postseason. It's just getting through the regular season. I like the idea of Dario out there more. So I think there's a slight decline, but I mean, they did about as well as you could for the money available. All
right. Thanks. Okay, so let's do a time check here. About how much time do you got left for me today?
Whatever you got.
Some questions. You good?
Yeah, you're good. Yeah.
Oh, awesome, man. Excellent. This is fun. Thank you so much for your time. So I've got a few other questions now outside of the preview area. Let's talk about DeAndre Ayton and Mikal Bridges are still pending extensions. And they've got there's various opinions on whether DeAndre Ayton in particular should get what kind of extension he should get versus a center in general. What kind of rookie extension should they get? And is he different? Mikal Bridges, do you pay him based on his VORP and all of his, his advanced stats, or do you pay him based on the fact that he's fourth or fifth best player on a good playoff team? You tell me, what would you do for Ayton and Bridges in the terms of their extensions if you were Robert Sarver?
I mean, I think you're maxing out Ayton. Like that's what the market's going to be. He goes to restricted free agency, he's getting a max deal. You could say, yeah, but now I'm paying him a lower max than, if he signs an offer sheet and then you match it, I'm paying him a lower max. But there is something to the idea that you may have now upset him and his agent down the road, right? We saw that. Very different situations. We saw that with Gordon Hayward and the Jazz, where he signed a 3-1 with Charlotte in restricted free agency. They obviously matched, and then years later, he was like, "Yeah, I don't really feel this anymore. I don't feel a whole lot of loyalty to you." And so I think also Ayton's good. Like you're right, he's gone through these stretches. He obviously had the suspension in year 2. He's gone through these kind of roller coaster stretches, but what we saw to him in the playoffs
Yeah.
If he's close to that moving forward in the next few years, it more than justifies a max deal for him. He's an exceptional young big man that probably gets a little too much scrutiny because of who went after him in the draft. Where as you just look at his game and his production and how he's grown defensively, like that's a max center to me. So I wouldn't blink, I wouldn't blink when it comes to maxing him out. Bridges, if I'm Bridges and his agent, I'm saying you need to keep this core together. You guys haven't been any good, prior to this last season. You have to keep this together, max me out. Plus, I can, he could go somewhere and average 18 to 20 points per game relatively efficiently, right? And be probably not as good a defender as he's been because there's only so much energy you have, but he'd still be one of the better defenders in the league, and especially on the wings. I think what you're probably going to see is what just happened with John Collins in Atlanta, right? Yeah. Where the Suns say, "Hey, we've got like $80 million for you, $90 million for you. Like, here's an extension." And his camp goes, "No, we'd like to be maxed out or somewhere closer to that." They go through the season, they go into restricted free agency, and it doesn't even come down to an offer sheet. It's just, we've worked out a deal for you for 5 years, 120 million or 125 million, or somewhere in that range, right? And so you get the benefit of no max, but you're still paying him more than you wanted to. That's what I would guess is going to happen. I'm a huge Mikal Bridges fan. I thought that was the steal of the draft when they acquired him from Philly. I thought it was a huge mistake by Philly because he was so good in college and he's so good in the NBA. And you see what he does every single night to everyone going against him. Like, I feel like with Bridges, it's not ideal to pay a guy like that the max. I also think he could justify a max deal in that first extension. After that, no, I wouldn't want to pay him that, but that first extension, I think he's worth $25 to $30 million a year.
Yeah, no, we love him here for sure. Absolutely. It is going to be interesting to see how the Suns play this, because that is huge luxury tax implications.
Oh,
if you
huge,
pay both guys the max.
And it's not just the
interesting
money, right?
In a wrinkle. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, sorry, it's not just the money either. It's the restrictions that come after it too, with how you can acquire guys and everything. Like, it really does bog you down. But I mean, if you're a team looking to contend every year, you need Mikal Bridges.
Well, if they're going to go all in for the next couple of years, while Chris Paul is as healthy as he's obviously going to be, I think you got to do something like that. I don't know. We would all love it if Bridges would just be thrilled with something a little less.
Yeah,
but the interesting wrinkle on Mikal Bridges for an extension. So overall, rookie extensions, if you do the extension a year ahead of time, and I'm almost positive because I checked with both Bobby Marks and Keith Smith, and unless I misunderstood those guys, as an extension, the only time you can go 5 years is if you max them. Otherwise, it's a 4-year, a year early extension, like the Suns did for Suns fans, the Morris brothers and Eric Bledsoe. Actually, not Eric Bledsoe, but the Morris brothers. Sorry. Eric Bledsoe is the example of the other side. Whereas if Mikal Bridges waits until next summer, he can get a 5-year at any rate, like John Collins did this spring as a restricted free agent. So the Suns cannot even, unless they give Mikal Bridges a max, cannot get him 5 full years under contract.
Right.
It is quite possible that the Suns would be like, if you want 5 years, let's just wait till next spring and we'll do it, because we already got to give 5 to Ayton. The possible downside of that is if Mikal Bridges does have a pissed off bone in his body, which he doesn't appear to have any of that vengefulness in his body. But if he does have that, he could hold that against the Suns if they extended Ayton, for example, to the max, but then left him dangling for a year to have to play well one more year before he gets that extension that Ayton already got for not playing obviously, I think Ayton was more impactful in the playoffs. I don't even think that's a think. I think it's a no. Yeah, was more impactful in the playoffs, but Mikal Bridges has been more impactful for 3 years. So it's going to be interesting seeing how this plays out. And all I'm doing is crossing my fingers that they don't pull another Joe Johnson, which is probably you're too young. I don't know if you were too young for this, but
I remember.
man,
I remember.
Pissed off. Sarver, it was his first summer. Now, what's really interesting, there's some parallels here, and I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent. There's some parallels from the summer of 2004. They brought in Steve Nash. They spent big money on Quentin Richardson. So the huge money in free agency. They were looking at a max extension for Amari Stoudemire already. Sean Marion had recently gotten a huge extension. So they had all this money committed. And then you got little Joe Johnson, who at the time was one of the most unproductive 21-year-old starting guards in the league. In the 03-04 season. He really was. I mean, the dude got 40 minutes a game and still just scored 17, something like that. Like, he was basically, hey, you got to show me a little bit. So Sarver and him, his camp disagreed on about $1 million a year. He goes out and kills in the 04-05 season, then walks away getting a max contract. We got to hope that that doesn't happen with Mikal Bridges. Mikal Bridges is already better than Joe Johnson ever was at this point in their careers, but it's going to be tough. And no Suns fan is 100% happy with what they think will happen with Robert Sarver. So far, so good. Knock on wood. They've done everything they need to do. Let's hope they continue it. Okay, next question. The Suns traded out of the draft this year. Totally. And as we already talked about, they even are using their two-way spot for a veteran who's 25. The youngest guy they have on the team is Deandre Ayton at 23. Everyone else is 25 or older now. What do you think of the Suns skipping out on youth? Do you think that's a bad sign, or do you think it's necessary?
I don't think it's a bad sign this year, right? I think it's fine to be out of the draft. I do think this was a deep draft, like into like the 40-45 range, where you could get a really nice player who could be productive, who could be on a two-way and in and out of the top part of the organization and going back to the G League. But I think it's fine for now. I think it's the problem is if it becomes like a trend again with the Suns, right?
Yeah.
With
like it was in that same era. Yeah,
exactly. Right. And you hope that was just Robert Sarver being a new owner, not understanding the value of certain things, worrying about all this money up front. And you hope that now, almost 20 years later, that he has the understanding of what it takes. He's learned from the mistakes, and then that's not the thing moving forward for them. So like this might look a little worse in this draft for trading out of it, because again, it was deep with role players. But as long as they don't do it next year, unless the move to trade out of it brings them an important piece, like then it's fine. But yeah, you just don't want to see that trend multiple years.
Yeah, multiple years. Yeah, before anyone flames me here, they do have Jalen Smith, who's 21 years old. He just turned 21. The reason I don't really consider him part of the young guys is he's been dangled for trade talks for guys like Thad Young and all that all summer. So I'm not convinced he's going to be with the team this next year. And from what we saw in Summer League, he made all Summer League, and he's high motor, great rebounder in traffic, all that. He's got a lot of issues with scoring and his in the paint. Sorry, against resistance, and he's just kind of skinny for the league. So we'll see what happens with him. But he is another young guy that James Jones has said he's kind of like our first round pick this year, because he had no training camp, no Summer League, no nothing this past year. So he was kind of a red shirt. Okay. Now I think you already answered my next question. Do you see Devin Booker as an all NBA guard this year?
I think he'll be in the running for. I think it's just tough to know. Like, there's 6 of them, right? And there's like 12 guys who are worthy every single year. And so, I think, like, as long as he's healthy, I think so. It's a little tough because Chris Paul does take some of those votes away off his own team. But I mean, it's also like how they classify, like they call him Luka a guard or a forward, like that kind of muddles some things. I wish they would just 15 guys. Here's your 15 all NBA players, and not leave it up to positions, because then I think you'd be a lock. Like, I don't think there's any skepticism if they just say here's the top 15 guys from this year. But yeah, like I would say like 80% sure he'll make all NBA.
Okay. Thank you. And you did say early in the podcast here that you voted for him this year.
Yeah, I voted for him this past year.
Yeah, that's great. You also voted for Chris Paul, or did you have to make the choice?
Let me double check. I'm pretty sure I voted for both of them.
Some of the guys were saying, or who were doing votes, were saying they had to choose between the two. So I didn't know.
Yeah. I got it right here. Or do I? Maybe I don't. Maybe this is bad podcasting, me trying to look something up.
No, it's okay. That's all right. Don't worry about it. Devin Booker, all NBA, you say 80% chance. Now, here's about the opposite argument the opposite situation. DeAndre Ayton.
Mm-hmm.
If you put him, is he one of the top 15 players in the game potentially this year? I would say absolutely not. He just isn't. But because of the positional requirements on all NBA, being that there's going to be 3 centers named unless they change the rules before the season starts. What do you say are the chances Ayton becomes considered a top 3 center and makes all NBA in the next couple of years?
In the next couple of years, yeah, I think if you put it like in the next 3 years, I think there's a decent chance of it. Next year, like it's just, you can pencil in Jokic and Embiid, and then you do have some very talented centers out there, and even like some up and coming guys like a Bam Adebayo. If the Heat have a really good year and he's as good as I think a lot of us think he is, like Bam could be in the running for that. Never. I was going to say if the Wolves ever get their stuff together, Karl Anthony Towns could be back in the mix. They're not going to get their stuff together, so we don't have to worry about that. Like there's just the center position is a lot deeper than I think people give it credit for, and so like Ayton is on his way, but yeah, he's going to need to be a lot more consistent. Them winning so much helps. Being such a good team definitely helps because the wins do tend to matter in a lot of that voting. But yeah, like I would say within the next 3 years, I would expect him to be in the seriously be in the running for at least that third team. And I just double checked. I did vote for Chris Paul and Devin Booker.
Right on, NBA, man. So, yeah. All right, you're the new favorite.
We'll see how that goes. I don't know. I don't know if that'll hold, but I'll take it for right now.
Completely fixed your reputation. This is awesome.
I did Chris Paul's second team and Devin Booker third team, for full.
There we go. Okay,
disclosure.
You've at least surpassed Amin El Hassan. On the tier of Suns fans.
Not hard to do either. By the way, I surpassed him. Not hard to do.
Okay, final question for you.
Yeah,
are the Suns still contenders, considering the potential for internal improvement among the younger guys? Are the Suns still contenders if Chris Paul plays less than all NBA level?
Yes, because I don't think you need him to carry that team, right? Because Book is so good, and because maybe I'm just too in the bag for Bridges. I think Bridges can do more. Campaign is very solid as a backup point guard, to where if Chris missed 20 games, I think you could expect Cam to come in there, start, and for them, depending on what the schedule is, like for them to not have this dramatic drop off to where you're like, oh my God, the season is tanking. I think they fixed those issues within that team, knowing how to win. You probably need him to be that in the playoffs, even though we just saw him kind of in and out of effectiveness because of injuries this last time. I don't think you can expect that to hold year after year. So I think you need him to be all NBA level in the postseason. That's also just because it's the West, and that's how the West tends to be in the playoffs. So I think regular season it's fine. I don't think you need him to have this amazing season, but yeah, when it gets to the postseason, like it's all hands on deck.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Zach.
Oh, for sure.
Tell everyone where we can find you.
At Talk Hoops on any of the social platforms that matter. You can read at The Athletic. We've got a lot of good stuff coming out for the season previews and for coverage this season. That'll be a lot of fun that I think you guys will like. Sirius XM NBA Radio, Sirius XM Mad Dog Sports Radio Friday nights with Amin El Hassan. It's me and Amin basically just talking football. I will say this, somehow, and I don't know how this has happened, Amin El Hassan has become a phenomenal prop bets guy for the NFL. Like phenomenal. Really? To where we were giving out prop bets that he was bringing to the show last season, and it hit on probably 60 to 65%. Week 1 of the NFL season this year, 4 for 4. He was 4 for 4 in week 1 on prop bets. And so look, we don't give them out anywhere other than this radio show. It's 8:45 Pacific time, Friday nights on Mad Dog Sports Radio, when we give out those prop bets. If you want to potentially make money based off his recommendations, that would be the place to do it. And then if you want to hear us just yell at each other about movies, Cinephobe is the podcast.
Yeah, I love the Cinephobe podcast.
Thank you.
For sure. And definitely, you know what, sports betting actually just finally became legal last Thursday in Arizona.
We had a caller call in saying that there was is there at Chase Field, is there a like a bookie now or something like that?
The new Suns Arena. It's called Footprint Center now for some reason. But
Footprint Center. We're just not going to have a good name for this arena, are we? Like walking stick or talking stick
Let's
or whatever
meet at the
it was.
foot. Yeah, it's
meet at the foot. Actually, meet at the foot.
Funny,
you know, I don't hate that. If you just
the foot.
if you meet at the foot, it's not good, but I don't hate it. Yeah.
Yes, there's a sports book there at the arena. This podcast is sponsored by DraftKings, and all you got to do is bet $1 and you get $200 in free bets instantly.
Ooh, wow.
So use Amin's, even no matter what you think of Amin as
no matter what, I'm telling you, use
his prop bets.
I
go for it this weekend.
15 hours a week for work minimum, right? I cannot stand Amin. He drives me insane, and yet he is making us money with these prop bets. So every Friday night, 8:45 Pacific time. There you go.
Hey, do me a favor. Tell him hi for me. I haven't talked to him lately because we've been because of all the COVID and all that stuff.
For sure.
So you can find me. My name is Dave King NBA. My @ is Dave King NBA on Twitter. All my work is at brightsideofthesun.com, my written work, and of course this podcast. So thank you very much, Zach. I appreciate your time today, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's fun.